This is a TENET 70, a beautiful 70% keyboard with a fantastic OLED screen. I can probably say that this is the coolest keyboard I have built so far this year. I mean, look at this 24K gold-plated weight. Let's bask in its glory and enjoy the music and enjoy the eye candy. That is the TENET 70. But I'm sure you've all heard the TENET 70 doesn't sound that good, right? Well, does it? Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is Scott K. I decided to start with that because, in my opinion, the TENET doesn't sound too bad. It's not like the best sounding keyboard there is, but it's definitely not the worst. And to my ears, it has a fairly distinctive clack that I rather enjoy. I think I built too many Thaki keyboards lately, honestly. You know, if you eat steak every day, sometimes you just want that $1.59 Taco Bell taco. I'm not saying that this is a $1.59 Taco Bell taco. Super far from it. But I can tell you that it's not the stock. That what you heard is not the stock sound of the TENET. The stock TENET actually sounds like this. Yup, that's what everyone's talking about. It's a very muted, quiet, and just kind of like a flavorless sounding keyboard. It's like if you get a Taco Bell taco, but you get no sauce with it, kind of, you know. But it really didn't take too much to make the board sing. Today, I'm going to show you what this TENET 70 is all about, and also talk about a simple concept. You are the author of your destiny and you control how your keyboard sounds. There are so many different sound modifying mods out there that you can pretty much pull any one of them and use it. Now, I could hear you guys. I could literally hear some of you guys right now. Why would you have to modify a near $600 keyboard, which this is, to make it sound good? It should be good right out of the box, right? Well, I wish that were the case too. But I think if you're buying the TENET, you're probably buying it for its looks and maybe its design, maybe even for the 24K gold weight, and also that cool multifunction OLED screen. So what I want to say is, hey, if you decide to buy the TENET for its aesthetics, then you might want to also mod it a little bit to make it also sound the part. It's really not that much. If you're looking for the best sounding board and don't really care for how this thing looks, then you probably should look elsewhere. Let's get started. Alright, so what is the TENET 70? The TENET 70 is a unique 70% keyboard from Metakey. It is intended to be a premium keyboard with high quality materials and manufacturing practices, intended to hit the $450 to $600 price point. Aside from the beautiful looks, the TENET 70 features a built-in OLED screen that has many interesting features built in. The 70% form factor is also rather unique in that the TENET 70 is actually a 60% keyboard with an additional 10% navigational cluster attached. The uniqueness goes even beyond that once you consider that the TENET can be flipped to either be right-handed or left-handed. Sometimes innovations do drive the premium in products like this as well. If Metakey did anything right, it was to ensure that the TENET 70 really gives off a premium vibe. It actually starts right from the box. Very nice soft touch material and a classy black box with a subtle yet tasteful TENET 70 marker by Metakey. Inside, you're greeted by nicely packaged components like the plate and the PCB, and this presentation of parts you need to put this together. But wait, what is this? You also get tools. Not just a basic screwdriver or a simple Allen key, nope, you get a whole set of hex keys, then also a nice plastic tweezer. This is definitely going to come in handy later, trust me. As usual, you get a nicely packaged PCB and also the plate. In this case, it's a PC plate as provided by Metakey. The PCB is a fairly standard black PCB on the thinner side. I didn't get the exact millimeter measurement, but it does require a shim to make the stabilizers actually fit nice and tight. It is a hot swap PCB with perky RGB as expected, and has KO hot swap sockets. There are no flex cuts in this PCB whatsoever. What is interesting is that the TENET 70 has two PCBs, one main one and the other one for the right arrow and the navigation cluster. You'll notice that the navigation cluster is where everything plugs into, the ribbon cables as well as the JST cable, so it's a little bit complicated here. My sample came with a set of PC plates for both the main and the Navi cluster PCBs. Similar to the PCB, the plate is also a fairly standard design with no flex cuts at all. However, for plate flex cuts to really work properly, the PCB also should have the corresponding cut, so in this case, it really wouldn't have done much anyways if just the plate had it. One of the reasons why the TENET 70 I think is also on the stiffer side is because of this. Other than that, the PC plate has countersunk screw holes, which should be expected for a premium board such as this. Now, let's get into the main course, the case. Remember that the TENET 70 is a 70% keyboard, 60% with a 10% navigation cluster attached. They try to make this very clear, and it even includes this information engraved in the case itself. I have the navy blue case, and I can tell you, this thing is beautiful. The anodization was perfect, and the dark blue against the brass, just stunning. But what was also very impressive was all the attention to detail that Metakey has put into the case design. As mentioned before, all the engraving, the small machine details, really shows off the level of manufacturing that was put into the TENET. This thing will come in 3 versions. Full aluminum version with an aluminum weight for around $450. This one that I have, the fancy aluminum and brass version, somewhere around $550 to potentially $600. Then there is the FE, the first edition, that is not yet defined, but I'm sure it will cost even more than this brass one I have. Not a cheap board by any imagination, but as soon as you handle this case, you can actually see why it costs so much. I mean, the brass weight on the bottom is massive. And in addition, this right here, it's plated in 24K gold. You heard that right, it's plated in real gold. One fun trick the TENET 70 also has is this. You can actually flip the case around and turn it southpaw for a lefty. It's actually a really nice trick. It takes some time and effort to do that, so I'm really not going to show off that today in this demonstration here, and it also doesn't really impact the sound and feel. So let's skip that for this video. I'm going to keep everything in the right side configuration. Now, what was surprising about the TENET is that it was missing something, a big bag full of foam. Instead, it has this silicone plate dampener and this super thin piece of pour-on case dampener. Now for the plate dampener. Silicone is not a porous material, so it has a bigger impact, in my opinion, on the structure-borne sound of the plate and PCB, essentially reducing the overall sound output. However, I will use this anyways because when using a flexible PC plate like this, it becomes a pain to kind of insert and remove switches without a foam or filler in between. So it stays in this situation, in this build, for convenience sake. For stabilizers, I'm using Owlabs by Owlabs because these actually work just really well, even with just a little bit of Krytox 205. Oh, before I forget, the TENET also comes with this nice little microfiber polishing cloth, which is very handy for a keyboard like this. Now, the assembly of the TENET. It's unique, and I'll be honest, it's not the easiest. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay is an online service that helps you print PCBs, do 3D printing, or even CNC machining. If you're an aspiring keyboard designer or whatever else designer, you can take your design and simply upload it to get something made quick. Or, if you have the source code for a PCB that you already have and you need a replacement, you can also get that done as well. They can handle all types of PCBs from your simple single layer designs to multi-layer stacks. Beyond PCBs, if you want to try making your own case, PCBWay can machine that as well. Remember when Glarsis made his triple keyboard? Yup, it was PCBWay that actually helped him make it. And finally, PCBWay has a platform called Shared Projects that provides a community for creators to show off their projects and designs. Obviously, keyboards are also a part and included in this process, so go and check it out. What is interesting about this is that the TENET actually installs upside down. Let me show you what I mean by that. So you look back in the box and you realize that there's this fancy cutout piece of foam. This is actually the base where the top case fits into. Given the challenges of this board, Metakey went the extra step to provide you what you really need. Given that the TENET is a gasket mounted keyboard, we start by applying the many gaskets, 24 to be exact. 12 for the top and 12 for the bottom. Yeah, that's a lot. Then you also have these horizontal gaskets. This keyboard just has a lot of gaskets. Then you take your PCB and plate assembly and you drop it into the top case. Here's a nice and close look at the OLED screen before you kind of screw it all together. During this process, make sure that all of your arrows are pointing in the same direction. This way, the main PCB, the navigation PCB, and the screen are all aligned right side up and working correctly and nothing's kind of backwards. Finally, you start the cable connection process, and I have to admit, this is a pain. You can either do this in one of two ways. The first method is to install the OLED screen first, then feed the ribbon cable through the little slot. Then you insert the ribbon cable into the connector using the plastic tweezer provided. Remember what I told you about the tweezer? They put that in there because you need it. They weren't just trying to be nice or anything like that. The second method is to connect everything together, then try to kind of use the hex keys provided to tighten the screen down through the little side openings on the side. Honestly, neither method is really easier than the other, so take your pick. After the screen and the navigational PCB is in place, you connect it to the main PCB through the provided ribbon cable like this. This is much easier. Once you have the plate and PCB assembly in, you need to work on the JST connector. I recommend that you connect the JST connector first to the lower part of the actual case, then use some tape to guide it into the channel like this. If you don't do this, the cable will be stuck in between the case and the PCB, and that's going to actually result in eating away that tiny little bit of flex this keyboard has. Then connect the cable into the PCB like this. Now, put everything together and complete the assembly. For my original build, I decided to go with the Gateron CJ Switches. They're blue and I thought it matched the blue case very well. And for keycaps, I used the Polycaps Whale for the same exact reason. The overall keyboard turned out looking absolutely fantastic. Then I took it for a typing test and ran into this problem. As mentioned before, the TENET has the tendency to sound very muted or kind of dead. It's a shame given how amazing this board looks. In addition, I also noticed that the TENET was a fairly stiff board as well. What is interesting is that this is somewhat caused by an intentional design direction. Metakey mentioned that they wanted to have the slimmest profile possible to keep that look really nice, so they decreased the overall interior volume. They also wanted to remove any hollow sounds by having a larger volume as well. But the case, being so heavy and dense, doesn't really have any ping or anything, so check this out. So I decided to see what I can do from a sound and flex feel perspective. First up is the feel. I already knew that I'm working with limited interior volume and I can't really increase that. So I take a different approach. We don't care as much about the upward plate flex, right? But we care more about that downward plate flex. I also noticed that the gaskets being used on the TENET is fairly thin. So what I did was this. I took the super thick pour-on gaskets from the KBDFANS D65. If you look at this versus the stock TENET gasket, there's a huge difference right here. I also shortened the overall gasket length so that it can flex easier since there will be less pushback force from the gaskets. Then I tackled the top. I took all the stock TENET gaskets off and then used this. This is a thin neoprene foam around 1.5mm thick. The idea is to increase the thickness of the lower gaskets and decrease the thickness of the upper gaskets. This way, we can fit the plate assembly in, maximize the downward flex, without really modifying the interior volume. If you want to try doing this for your TENET or some other keyboard similar to this, check it out in the description below. I will link all these products that I'm using. So, did my flex mount work? I mean, given the limited amount of interior volume, you're not going to get some crazy amounts of flex out of this board. However, I feel that the thick thin gasket approach did actually help a tiny bit. I also removed the lower case foam underneath to maximize the volume as well. I think overall, it did help increase the downward flex by around like 0.3mm or so. Not a lot, but my subjective opinion is that the board does feel a little less stiff due to the fat gaskets below. In addition, by increasing the interior volume, it may also impact the sound. Typically, greater volume you have, it becomes a larger resonance chamber, so you may actually get a fuller sound. It's kind of like the difference between a violin and a cello. So now the sound. There are a few different things you can do to increase the volume or liveliness of the board. PE foam is actually one of them, but I was willing to go all the way to this, but I didn't. Why? Because this was enough. Masking tape. I know what you're thinking. You put masking tape on a $600 keyboard? What is wrong with you? Well, hey, either I use this as a muted board or tune it a bit and get what I want, right? Ain't no shame in that. So yes, I put 2 layers of blue masking tape under the PCB. This helps to increase the overall thock and the volume as well. Then I put everything back together through the whole painstaking process once more. And here is another critical point. The sound of the keyboard is shaped by multiple different things. Switch is one major one, so I wanted to increase the overall sound volume of the build. So I used a louder switch. Typically, a long pole switches bottom out harder and also creates more volume in my opinion. These are Gateron Blizzard's long stem tactile switches. They create a pretty nice and clacky sound, and I felt it was perfect for this application. Finally, I swapped the PBT Polycap Whale to GMK Hammerhead. PBT caps are a little bit drier sounding, while nice ABS caps like GMK or now even DCX is more glassy. So this was, I felt, a good fit. You got a small sample of what this thing sounds like before, but here is actually the full typing test now, so check it out. That is a big difference between the original build and the modified build. Overall, I much prefer how this turned out. And now, the board actually sounds as good as well as it looks. And this OLED screen, it's really cool. First of all, it actually has some fun functions built in, like, for example, it displays the key press on your keyboard. This is like a built-in switch tester. Really nice for a hot swap board because it lets you know if you have a bent pin or not and if your switches are actually working or not. It also measures your typing speed on the fly. It also has this handy hardware monitor built-in feature for CPU, GPU, and disk temperatures. But unfortunately, I have the 12th generation Intel platform and it's not really supported yet by a lot of these things, but others have confirmed that their machines actually do work with it, so hopefully it works with yours. All of this is controlled through their proprietary software that is actually very easy to use and also to configure. It provides basic functions like key mapping, lighting controls, stuff like that, but also offers more customization for this specific TENET 70, like this. You could upload your own photos or even text and make it scroll. As simple as it seems, it was actually very fun to play around with. So to sum this up, the TENET 70 is a premium board with emphasis on design, details, and also innovation. I mean, this thing even comes with a 24K gold-plated weight. It can be flipped to support both the right and the left-handed. If you don't need the arrows or even the navigation keys, you can actually turn this 10% portion into an attached macro pad as well. The screen can be configured to show some great info or just to be used for fun, which I did for the most part. And while the sound out of the box is weak, it can be tuned to make it sound much more vibrant as well. So given this, what is my final thought? If you're looking for a unique piece to add to your overall collection, where the looks and design is important, the TENET is that keyboard for you. If you're looking for a keyboard with the best sound and typing feel straight out of the box, and don't really care too much about design and whatnot, there are better options out there for you as well. All in all, the TENET is a nice addition to my collection, and I'll for sure have a lot of fun putting stupid messages on this OLED screen. One more thing, if I'm ever in a keyboard speed building competition and I can choose the keyboard my opponent has to use, it's going to be the TENET 70. It's a pretty slow build with all the connectors and ribbon cables and just, yeah. As usual, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe and I'll have more content for you in the future. Thanks.